There is something deeply strange happening in the world right now, and once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. Every single day, millions of incredibly intelligent people wake up, work hard, think carefully, and make what seem like reasonable decisions. And yet, despite all of that intelligence and effort, they end up in exactly the same place they were a year ago, 5 years ago, sometimes even a decade ago. They are stuck not because they are lazy, not because they lack talent, but because of something far more invisible and far more dangerous. And the truly terrifying part is that the smarter you are, the more vulnerable you are to this trap, because intelligence, as it turns out, is not always the advantage we think it is. Most of us grow up believing that intelligence is the ultimate tool for success, and honestly, that belief makes a lot of sense on the surface. Smart people can analyze situations more deeply, spot patterns others miss, and come up with creative solutions nobody else would have considered. But here's the part that nobody talks about. Intelligence comes with a hidden cost that is so subtle and so well disguised that most intelligent people never even realize they are paying it. The cost is this: the more intelligent you are, the better you become at justifying why you should not take action. Your brain becomes incredibly skilled at generating reasons, explanations, and perfectly logical arguments for why now is not the right time, why this particular approach will not work, and why you need just a little more information before you can move forward. And because these reasons are generated by an intelligent mind, they feel incredibly convincing not just to the people around you, but most importantly, to yourself. This is what psychologists call the intelligence trap, and it is one of the most well-documented and least discussed phenomena in the psychology of human behavior. If you have ever spent weeks or months thinking about a decision that you know, deep down, you should have made a long time ago, then you already understand what overthinking feels like from the inside. But what most people do not realize is that overthinking is not just an annoying habit, it is actually a deeply ingrained survival mechanism that the intelligent brain has developed to protect itself from the pain of failure and the discomfort of uncertainty. When you overthink a decision, your brain is essentially trying to eliminate all possible risk before you commit to any action. It runs through every possible scenario, every potential downside, every way things could go wrong, searching for the perfect risk-free path forward. And the problem is that the perfect risk-free path almost never exists, which means the overthinking brain keeps searching indefinitely, and the result is paralysis. Think about someone who has been talking about starting a business for years. They have done the research, read the books, made the spreadsheets, and yet somehow they never actually start. Every time they get close to taking the first step, a new question emerges, a new risk reveals itself, a new reason to wait just a little longer presents itself. This is not a story about laziness. This is a story about intelligence working against itself. One of the most common patterns in highly intelligent people is what I call the perfect plan syndrome. The tendency to spend enormous time and energy creating detailed, comprehensive plans for how you are going to achieve your goals, and then never actually executing those plans. Because the moment you start executing, reality immediately starts deviating from the plan, and that deviation feels deeply uncomfortable to a mind that worked so hard to think everything through in advance. What the intelligent person fails to understand in these moments is that execution is not the process of following a plan perfectly. It is the process of learning what the plan should have been. The only way to get the information you need to move forward effectively is to actually move forward and collect that information in real time, through real experience in the real world. No amount of thinking, planning, or preparation can substitute for the irreplaceable education that comes from actually doing the thing you are trying to do. The most successful people in almost every field are not the ones who had the best plans. They are the ones who started before they were ready, executed imperfectly, learned from what went wrong, and kept moving forward despite constant uncertainty. They understood something that highly intelligent people often struggle to accept, that progress is inherently messy, and that the mess is not a sign that something has gone wrong, but a completely normal and necessary part of the process. Now we need to talk about something that might be a little uncomfortable to hear. A significant portion of what highly intelligent people describe as careful consideration or strategic patience is actually fear of failure wearing an extremely convincing disguise. Fear of failure is one of the most universal human experiences, and there is nothing wrong with feeling it. But there is something deeply problematic about allowing fear to govern your decisions while simultaneously telling yourself that you are acting out of wisdom rather than fear. Here is how you can tell the difference between genuine strategic patience and fear disguised as patience. Genuine strategic patience looks like this. You have a clear goal, You have identified specific conditions that need to be met before you take action, and you have a concrete timeline for when you will act. Fear disguised as patience looks like this. You have a vague sense that you are not quite ready yet. The conditions for readiness keep shifting and expanding, and when someone asks you when you plan to start, you feel a flash of anxiety rather than confidence. If the second description sounds familiar, you are not alone, and recognizing this pattern is the first and most important step toward changing it. Intelligent people are particularly vulnerable to comparing their beginning to someone else's middle. When you encounter someone who has achieved something you want to achieve, your mind immediately begins analyzing what they did and how far you would need to go to get there. And because you are intelligent, this analysis is often quite accurate. You can see exactly how much you would need to learn and what you would need to sacrifice, and that clear-eyed assessment of the distance between where you are and where you want to be can feel absolutely crushing. What the intelligent mind often fails to account for is the full timeline of the person being observed. You see someone who has been building their business for 10 years and compare your 0 days of progress to their decade of compounded experience. And because the comparison feels so unfavorable, you conclude either that you are not good enough or that success would require sacrifices you are not willing to make, and either conclusion leads to the same result, which is staying exactly where you are. The truth is that every single person you admire for their success was, at some point, exactly as uncertain and inexperienced as you are right now. The only difference is that they did not wait until they were certain before they started. They started uncertain, they stayed uncertain for a long time, and they eventually became certain through the accumulation of experience that only action can provide. So what do you actually do about all of this? The first thing you need to understand is that getting unstuck is not a one-time event. It is a practice. Something you have to actively choose and recommit to every single day. The patterns we have been discussing did not develop overnight, and they will not dissolve overnight either. What changes first is not your behavior, but your awareness, your ability to catch yourself in the moment when you are using your intelligence to justify inaction and to name what is actually happening rather than accepting the sophisticated story your brain is telling you. The second thing you need to understand is that the goal is not to eliminate uncertainty before you act, but to develop a higher tolerance for uncertainty while acting. This means starting smaller than you think you need to, not because the small start is the destination, but because it is the only real antidote to the paralysis of waiting for perfect conditions. When the action is small enough, the fear becomes manageable, and when the fear is manageable, you can actually do the thing. And when you actually do the thing, you start collecting real information about reality, instead of imagined information about hypothetical scenarios. The third thing, and perhaps the most important, is to separate your identity from your outcomes. One of the deepest reasons that intelligent people avoid action is that they have tied their sense of self-worth so tightly to their performance that failure at a task feels equivalent to failure as a person. When this is the case, avoiding the task becomes a way of protecting your identity, because as long as you have not tried, you cannot have failed. Unhooking your identity from your outcomes does not happen quickly or easily, but it is the foundational work that makes everything else possible. Here is something important that corrects a fundamental misunderstanding, keeping a lot of people stuck. Most people imagine that when they finally get unstuck and start taking action, it will feel like confidence. They imagine they will wake up one day feeling certain and ready and motivated, and that feeling will carry them forward. This is not what getting unstuck actually feels like. Getting unstuck feels like doing something important while simultaneously feeling uncertain about whether it will work. It feels like moving forward without the reassurance of knowing the outcome in advance. It feels uncomfortable and imperfect, and sometimes even a little terrifying. And those feelings do not go away just because you have started acting. They just gradually become more familiar and therefore less paralyzing over time. The difference between people who stay stuck and people who make progress is not that the latter group eventually found a way to feel certain before acting. It is that they learned to act in the presence of uncertainty, because they understood that certainty they were waiting for was never going to arrive on its own. If you are waiting to feel ready, you will wait forever. Because readiness is not a feeling that precedes action. It is a feeling that follows it. The only way to feel ready is to start before you feel ready. To do the uncomfortable thing before you are comfortable with it. To take the uncertain step before you can see where it leads. That is not a motivational platitude. That is literally how the human brain works, and understanding it changes everything. So here is where we land after everything we have covered today. Being smart is a genuine advantage in many areas of life. But when it comes to personal growth and actually achieving the things you care about most, intelligence alone is not enough. And in some important ways, It can work against you if you are not careful about how you use it. The intelligent person's greatest challenge is not finding the right answer. It is learning to act before they are certain they have found it. You already have everything you need to start moving forward, not everything you need to guarantee success, but everything you need to take the next step. Learn from it, adjust, and take the step after that. The life you have been thinking about is not waiting for you to figure everything out. It is waiting for you to start. If this gave you something real to think about, subscribe to Level 1. Because every single week we go deep on the ideas that actually matter for becoming the person you want to be.